There you go.
Here I am, recording in progress. Oh, my goodness. Up in the front here, you can see we have some magazines. These are a magazine that I come to. It's from a different denomination, and they do have, and so you can, before you leave today, you can just take one with you or two or whatever. Called the Bible Study Program. And every single one of these has something in it that can be worthwhile since we're entering into Lent. For example, I just opened it up here. Okay, so, and what did I get? An article on the way of suffering, episode 5, and it takes it from Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. So you can see what, that these are interesting articles that these people have for you. And so I put them into your hands. Here's another one, see episode 6, the cross. And so these are meditations and things like that will fit into what we're doing in Lent. And so you can take them and keep them. So I've gone through them over the ages. Now what we're doing today is chapter 14, and let me just make the further statement that we began by going into Luke's informative way in the first 4 chapters to get us into what's happening, because he has a genealogy there, and he goes all the way back to Adam, whereas Matthew goes all the way back to Abraham. And so you can say, well, I don't think that Luke has it where you go all the way back over millions of years to get to Adam. So what they do, though, however, is pick out significant people that have come into their attention. For example, the obvious ones about the Ark and the covenant and the other type things that are available. So to people at the beginning. Then he has also a marvelous birth experience. We don't have in the Gospel of Mark a infancy narrative. He starts with John the Baptist. Then we have Matthew, and he has a genealogy, and he has genealogies arranged in 14. So you have 14, 14, and 14. That is 7 and 7, 7 and 7, 7 and 7. The way he arranges that is you have 6 sevens of names. And then who is the 7th 7? Because that is a sacred number. Yes, you're right, Jesus. So in other words, the way in which they assemble the material means that they're going to leave some things out and put other things in. You might want to remember that in Matthew's gospel, we have 4 women, and all 4 are very unusual. One of them dressed herself up as a woman of, I don't know, sinfulness, because no one of the family would marry. And this is very tricky because we have the father, and he has a son who's died. The other 2 sons will have nothing about taking over the father's business. So the father is stuck alone, and that means that's the end of that empire. And so the woman instinctively knows there's something going on, so she dresses up as a harlot, and then she takes a symbol that is going to be the payoff when she goes into town, because they don't want to have him kind of, be known as visiting a harlot. But anyway, what happens is now she is then the mother and the father of a person in the genealogy that is necessary. In other words, the way it is from the perspective of the biblical person, that these people that are selected to be there are people who advance what it is. So, and there's other people there too. There's a woman who's in the wall of Jericho, and she gives a red flag to tell them when the army is going to be open, for attack and stuff like that. So I think that's actually, I'm sincere, where if you go to places like Amsterdam, I've read, you will find the red light district, and so that's the place where the harlots hang around and all that. So we got all these kind of things happening. So in Luke's gospel, we find a beautiful rendition of writing, probably the best writing of the Gospels. John's writing is wonderful. but very esoteric. He only has 7 miracles, for example, that he has, because 7 is a sacred number. And but he has long discourses. He doesn't have parables like Luke would have parables like stories. Instead, what John has are discourses, and they go on for length. For example, you have in John, you have chapter 13, the Last Supper, 14, 15, 16, and 17, as they make their way out to Gethsemane. And so what we're dealing with then is some variety. And but in the synoptic gospels, synoptic meaning having the same view, we have what Mark has. And I think I showed you a chart where you have in Mark, you have a series of things, repeatable, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. So in other words, all very well concatenized so that you have all this stuff that comes out as similar. Then you have a journey to Jerusalem, and then you have Jerusalem. Well, Matthew and Luke are going to do the same thing. They're going to have Jesus in Galilee, Jesus on the walk, and then Jesus in Jerusalem. And so what we're doing now in Luke's gospel is, since we got to the end of chapter 9, beginning of chapter 10, we have the journey to Jerusalem. Now you say, okay, well, that's about 80 miles from the south part of Galilee and down there. That's a couple of days walk. Well, it doesn't happen that way, because what they do is they take their leisurely time. So it's going to be chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. And that's all going to be the material that is taken with the encounters that Jesus is going to have and other things that he's going to say and promote in each one of these things. And then when we get to chapter 19, then we get ready to go into the moments of Jesus to get ready for the Last Supper and for the crucifixion. So I hope that just gets us started a little bit. So we're going to do as much as we can today. And in doing so, we will take a clock here. I have a clock. So let's begin chapter 14. And you can see my commentary here. Healing of the man with dropsy on the Sabbath. Dropsy is one of those diseases where you don't have just something on your skin, or but you have some kind of difficulty of balance and of controlling yourself and of other type things. And so, and on a Sabbath, he went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. Remember, I mentioned to you that we have 11 times that Jesus goes into one of these free dinners. I myself, in my profession, love free dinners. And, just want to let you know that. Yeah, I see. Yeah, a good number of people taking notes here. Yeah. So, and the people there were observing him carefully. See, we slow down when we come to these things, because it just doesn't say that Jesus walks in. He is being observed carefully. Why? Because there's already in their spirit an antagonism towards Jesus, because of the fact that they are going to be saying, here is somebody who doesn't obey the law. Here's somebody who's making prophetic statements. Here's somebody who's doing miracles, and we don't know about them. And the people there were observing him. In front of them, there was a man suffering from dropsy. And see, I put down here, it's a retention and accumulation of fluid. So this is part of his disease. And verse 3, Jesus spoke to the scholars of the law and the Pharisees in replying, asking, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath or not? And so, I put into brackets there that just in the previous passage in chapter 13, there was a woman who was cured. And now here we get a balance, and this is intentional. I'm pretty sure that we get a man who is going to be cured. And you say, well, that is a modern day thing, to be worried about whether it's women or men, especially in those days when the women were to do their positions at home and stuff like that, and not to be part of following Jesus on the way to his conclusion. And so, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? But they kept silent. So he took the man, and after he had healed him, dismissed him. So that's the answer. He doesn't say anything. He just does it. And then he said to them, who among you, if your son falls into a cistern, would not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? See, so in other words, he's got them trapped, because they're going to say, if you do anything, well, we just had it at a mass upstairs. If we do anything that violates the 613 laws, the little laws that they have. And so just as an aside, what we want to say is that in the realm of what takes place in the gospel text is we're dealing with the law, is that you have to fulfill the law. The one person who now comes along and who knows more about the law than anybody else is Gamaliel and his favorite student, who also knows everything that there is, and that is Paul. So when Paul is now knocked over on his 3 days, then he's blind, and then he comes out of that as baptized. Then he goes off into the desert to meditate on Jesus for months after months after months. And finally, in the year 49, he starts his ministry, whereas Jesus has died in the year 30, April 7th. And so what Paul is doing is kind of taking what he understood to be the way to be a good person is to follow all the laws, and he changes that. And because he says it's not to be doing all the laws, it's because the major law is one of forgiveness and charity. And that's the one thing that the Pharisees don't do. Remember in the famous parable about the prodigal son, which is off track. It's really the prodigal father. Prodigal means, very generous. And the son comes back home and he says, I'll just be a slave. But the older brother is there standing and looking down at him and stuff. Why? Because the fact that the son has violated all the laws. And so the older brother says, this can't be, and I deserve to be the one saved, not him, because he was a sinner. And so there we get the attitude that is building up. So let's continue here. So anyway, verse 5, he says, who among you, if your son falls into a cistern, somehow the text there got an extra or in there, but they were unable to answer his question. Then you can see the bracket that I have. It goes from verse 7 down to verse 14. And so this is a unit in itself. And so what we're doing here is taking a look at this as we continue. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. See, he says, when you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him. For example, if we go to the book of Providence, the wisdom book, chapter 25, 6 to 7, well, exactly that. And so anyway, what I got is a parable and humility. See chapter 13, chapter 18, and chapter 23. We're not going to take a look at that, but just to tell you that what Jesus is talking about is don't be taking the place of honor. Take the other place where you belong, and then your humility might bring you to the upper table. We've already talked enough about what the table is. It's a U-shaped thing. And so you have in the Last Supper, you have Jesus right in the middle. You have John on one side, on his right side, and over here Judas on his left side, and Peter all the way down. So this is a parable on humility. It says, when you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest may have been invited by him. And so the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, give your place to this man. Then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place so that when the host comes to you, he may say, my friend, move up to a higher position. Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table. So this is follows Luke's interest, as I mentioned to you here, that Jesus' attitude is always to distinguish between the rich and the poor. He has that one famous parable about the Lazarus, chapter 19. Lazarus is, not the Lazarus of John's gospel. It's the only parable that has a name to it. Everybody else is a man or a woman or something like that in the parable. Or, like the people that were working and complained about not getting enough money. So what we get here, though, is somebody's name. I think that is, when we get to that, that is because of the fact that there is, to my judgment, some conjunction between the people that preparing John's gospel, which comes out about the year 90, and the text of Luke, which comes out about the year 85. So I think there's some collusion between them. Not much, but I do think that that's how that Lazarus gets in there, because what happens with Lazarus? Well, Lazarus comes out of the tomb. And so when we're dealing with the fact about the parable about the man Lazarus who's outside the door there, and he's really scuffed up, so much so that the dogs come and lick his wounds. We're going to get to that passage later. but then he dies and he goes to heaven. And the rich guy who's got purple clothing on and stuff like that, which is automatically makes him rich, is there saying, I just need a drip of water, and stuff like that. So what we're getting here is that Luke is very conscious about the fact that there are rich people and there are poor people. And he kind of sides with the poor people because they can be rich, as can be the people that Paul encounters when he goes to the Pharisaical communities of the New Testament. And Paul is there to say to them, I come to you, he says, and they often the pagans there, or even the Pharisees, pound him and beat him. But he said that this is all part of the experience, that I am a poor person. So let's continue. We're at verse 10 and then verse 11. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, when you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your neighbor or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. This sounds very much like an encyclical from Pope Francis. That's his bailiwick right there. Is the thing that we are here for is to advance the realm of the poor and he's not just talking about economic or social things, but about Christic things. So he may invite you back and give you your payment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame. So I put down, there's a huge amount of caring in the USA, for example. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for this will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So that is the conclusion that Jesus is making with these poor people. Now, these poor people remind me of the Indian tribe called the Kwakiutls. I think I might have mentioned this before. They're up in the northwestern part, going into Alaska, of Indian life. And they had a strange way of dealing with things. For example, if you have a party and you come to a party, okay, and you're going to give a gift. So what you do is you give a gift like a canoe, something expensive, a canoe, to the person who's having the party. Then it's up to the party is obliged to then pass on something of value to somebody else. So this is kind of like a circle affair, that you don't come and you say, well, I like your party and stuff like that. And since it's a free party, I'm going to have as much stuff as I can get. No, it's what you give away, because that puts the burden on the next person. So let's say that you throw a party and you get a wonderful gift, maybe a totem pole. What's your obligation? To make a better totem pole and give it to somebody else. So these Kwakiutls have put that into their social. You say, I'm not too interested in that. Well, that's true. I was not too interested in it myself, but there's a famous sociologist who goes to the Philippines, goes to all the places around that have these type of activities and writes up books on them. Okay, so let's continue. We thought a musical background would be just perfect for this morning, kind of relaxed, and stuff. So, yeah, here you get a free magazine, and you get music and stuff like that. So let's continue. Now we get to the parable of the great feast. I put down further illustration of the rejection by Israel. In other words, Jesus is continuously fighting Israel. Who is Israel? Israel is the Jewish people, and the Pharisees are their leaders, and the Sadducees are their, I would say, political leaders. So the parable of the great feast. One of his fellow guests, on hearing this, said to him, blessed is the one who will dine in the kingdom of God. And this is said to Jesus. Blessed is the one who will dine in the kingdom of God. See chapter 12, verse 27, the Messianic banquet. Messianic banquet is the banquet of entering into heaven, that there is automatically a celebration. Some people have a cry to equivocate what really is heaven like. It's there are books on this. The great writer of the Catholicism on heaven is a man named Kreeft, and he himself was in the Virginia at one of the universities there, and he was studying architecture or something like that. And so they said to him, what you have to do, since we're dealing with architecture, you have to, and he was a Protestant and a very shallow one. And so anyway, he goes to Catholic churches because they got beauty to them. Stuff. Yeah, well, I'm going to spend a little time on this. I went up to a biblical conference once up in Philadelphia. And since myself and a couple of other theology students were the kind of like the youngest and the least knowledgeable, and all the other big name people, even from Europe and stuff like from France and Germany stuff, they sat at our table and they all of a sudden everybody's talking German. And then the guy from France sits down and then everybody's talking French. And then we're hoping that our English guy will come along. Oh yeah, now they're talking English. Oh yeah, I understand. So that'd be good for us. Anyway, they send us to a Methodist church. And in the Methodist church, we get in there. It's a beautiful red rug all the way there. Beautiful dark brown, not black, but brown pews. And up front, not an altar, but just a podium. And the windows are clear and clear, not a single bit of art or beauty in them. And so we asked one of the people that was there, because we're getting ready for, we were assigned to get ready for this stuff. So, and she said, well, he says, we believe that God comes to us in knowledge and not, all that stuff about, art and music and other type things. So, oh, okay. Says we understand what you're saying, and we save our spittle till we get outside. So because of the fact that they kind of were looking down on us. But anyway, this is the Messianic Banquet. Messianic Banquet is a good Catholic church. I spent 4 years up in Canada because that's where our college was, the seminary college, right above the falls, by the way, given to us back in the 1850s or 60s by a bishop up there who wanted to have an order that was dedicated to Our Lady. So we go up there. So in the 1920s, they built a chapel, and they put a ring of beautiful window colors and stuff like that all the way around on the bottom part here. And that's about Elijah, because that's, Mount Carmel. So anyway, that's Elijah. So if you start over here, you go through the whole story of Elijah, but it's all in color and they're beautiful. And then you go up to the top, and what is it? Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So you go around there and you see Our Lady, and it's like a great Christmas card. I mean, you just Mary with the child, and following all the things of Mary that she encounters Jesus, including the cross and stuff like that, are in the windows. So when you walk in, you're already bathed in the colors and flavors of a beauty and stuff like that. It just, people are astounded. It's on their trip. We know when they get people for a bus saying, we're going to take you around Niagara Falls and show you the stuff. Well, one of the things they showed you was our chapel because of the beauty that was in it. So that's what we're getting here is something like this. The Messianic Banquet is something far beyond what the normality would be. It's all the difference between getting a fancy, incredible meal and a White Castle. So, which I love, by the way. So anyway, when the time came for dinner, he dispatched his servant to say to those invited, come, everything is now ready. But one by one, they all began to excuse themselves. The first said, I purchased a field and must go to examine it. I ask you, consider me excused. Another said, I purchased 5 yoke of oxen. I'm on my way to evaluate them. I ask you, consider me excused. And another said, I've just married a woman and therefore I cannot come. Turn the page. Verse 21. The servant went and reported this to the master. So you can see that this is a kind of a long-winded parable. It's the parable of the great feast. I will mention this to you, it just as a little bit of help. We do have people that are hear Jesus calling them and they don't go. The most famous one that I can tell you about is Elisha. Elisha is the disciple of Elijah. And so now when we're dealing with Elijah, he's one of the great figures of the Old Testament. And he's going to go, this is an actual event, it's not a parable. And he's going to go down to the place of crossing over, because the place of crossing over is where, when they came from Egypt, they came around the south way, and then they came to the east side, and then they went across the river to the west side. So it wasn't like they came right to the west side, so they came across. And that was at the place of crossing over. John mentions that in his gospel when he said, now this took place, he said, where he didn't say about that event the Exodus because everybody knew it. He says, but this was the place of crossing over. So it's a famous place. So Elijah's going to go there, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. But when he crosses over the place where you had the crossing over, he goes over there, and then all of a sudden there is a glow in the sky of the sun, and that sun then takes up Elijah up into heaven. Meanwhile, Elisha is there and had been asked by Elijah to follow him. So you would say, well, that means he drops everything and follows him. He said, no, he says, I can't do that. He says, because remember the excuse that they gave in these parables is, no, my father died and I have to go home. Well, and Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead. And you say, well, that's cruel. So what happens with Elisha is he goes home and he has oxen, like a dozen of them. So it's 6 and 6, to do plowing. And what does he do? He offers them up as a sacrifice and as a meal. So he throws a party. And then he embraces, I'm now just using my imagination. He gives his hugs and kisses and everybody in his family and everybody there. Why? Because he's going to follow Elijah. So why doesn't he follow Elijah right away? Well, because the fact that Elijah knew that this man was a man of great faith. He wasn't, considering, I'll go there and then I'll make some excuse. He wasn't making an excuse at all. What he was doing is taking his wealth and his well-being, and he's giving it away. So then what he does is he takes a group with him, about 50 people, because that's his school of prophecy, and they come to the west side of the place of crossing over. So that's where Elijah crosses over. How does he cross over a river? Do I have to say? Moses. So what he does is he takes off his tunic. Carmelites have tunics, so I just want to mention that. So anyway, and he hits the water, and it stops. And so he goes through. So then Elisha comes across now. And so anyway, so Elijah says to him, he says, what do you want? He says, I want to have your spirit. And he says, well, then I will give you my spirit. So he's going to give him his cloak as a sign of that. And he says, no, give me 2 of them because I want to have twice as much spirit given to me. So Elisha sequence here actually works out a lot better than you would think, because now it's not just that he followed Elijah, but he followed Elijah and now gets appointed to be the next great prophet, which he is. Remember, Jesus, in the very first time that he gets into a synagogue, they're going to, in his own hometown, remember, they were going to take him up on a hill and throw him over, because he said that Naaman, the king up there in that area up there, had a leprosy. And so Elisha went up to him and cured him. And by curing him, the man then is outside of the realm of Judaism. So when Jesus said there was a woman that was up in Zarephath, and so she was cured, and Naaman was cured and stuff like that, and they're furious, because what he's saying to the people of his own place there and stuff is, I'm not here for you as much as I am here for the world. And he's got 2 examples. And so that's why they take him up and want to throw him over a cliff and kill him. Remember how that passage goes, that they're going to throw him down and die. And so what happens is Jesus stands there imprisoned, and he walks right through them. See, what is that a hint of? Luke is so good a writer on this story within a story. Here, Jesus is going to be thrown down a cliff, but he walks through them. So the evil, or the lack of understanding, is going to put Jesus to death. But what does he do? He moves right through them to further being. So what he does is actually turn himself into a death resurrected person by hint. That's what you kind of get when you start to read the gospel in that fashion. So that's what we have here too. He says, so let's start to read back here. Sayings on discipleship. So great crowds were traveling with him. He turned and addressed them. And he says that there's a series of sayings here. And it says this completes the messianic forgiving of this dinner. So there's a series of sayings. Verse 24 there, he says, I tell you, none of those men who were invited will test my dinner. You see, I underline that 3 times over. His dinner is the heavenly kingdom, is the conclusion of the messianic gift. So and what is it based on? It's based on acceptance and forgiveness. How about Luke's famous parable about the older brother being furious because the younger brother has sinned up to his eyeballs there, and and so he deserves to be out in the field as a slave. But the father will have none of that. Gives him a fat calf, gives him rings and things like that, gives him a beautiful cloak to wear. And the older brother is thinking, this is terrible. So what we have here, if anyone comes to me, now this will stop a lot of people here. Great crowds were traveling with him. He says, if anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, this, like I say, will stop people. Did it not stop you right in your seat? Well, that's because we take these words to be the completion of his thought. How can it possibly be that the very person who brings love into life and families and things like that can get that? Well, I return, my interpretation of this is, of the style of writing of the Greeks and the Romans, and I've mentioned this already, is to have a hyperbole. Hyper, means infinite. So a hyperbole is to make something like crazy. What does Jesus say? He says, unless you walk through the narrow gate like a camel going through the eye of a needle. You say, wait a minute, there's never a camel around, and there's no big needle around either that has, so somebody walking through, you might get caught on, your hump might get caught on it. So anyway, you're saying that's crazy. Well, that's because it's a hyperbole. In other words, it's an impossible situation. And so Jesus is saying that you really have an impossible situation here, because you cannot just stay here and be here and live here and do this and say that you're part of the messianic approach. What you must do, when he says hate, he is saying you must separate yourself from the family, from this. That's why this, because we take things to be words meaning exactly what the words say. And so I just want to point this out to you, that the way in which we would look at this is Jesus is saying, it's going to cost you. For example, do the apostles bring their wives with them? Well, we believe and have some record of Peter having a wife come along. It did Paul. We don't know if he was married or not, but we don't seem to get any of that action. So we just had today the celebration of the Japanese martyrs. They were from Europe. They went to Japan back in 1600s or so. They presented Christ, and eventually the emperor there or something put them to death, tortured them, and crucified them, because he said that's the way that they took your God. And so they crucified him on a beach. And so you saw this in the movies and stuff like that, of the row of people on crosses and things like that. Well, that's what it cost. So when Jesus says you must hate your father, your mother, your citizenry and stuff like that, there's something else in mind, because it stops you when you're cold and makes you come to an explanation of that, because it violates everything that Jesus is saying in every other place where he is there and about this. So anyway, he's eventually, what the line is verse 27. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So even if you're willing to, even if you're called on to give up your life, you must follow that by following me. So I put up there total dedication necessary to be a disciple of Jesus. You have to have this commitment. See, the contrast of 1 Corinthians. What is 1 Corinthians? Well, go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. They have this at weddings. It's the most used text of the New Testament for weddings. Love is, and then he gives a whole definition of love is not, harsh. Love is not, difficult. Love is not this, that, the other thing. That we had a Bible where I can read it more clearly, but it is a series of love patterns. This is what love is, and that's what Jesus is saying the fulfilled life is. So how can Jesus be saying through Paul that love is what the essence of humanity is, and to have this kind of talk? So what we have to do is kind of scrape the surface and get down to the depth of it. So whoever does not carry his own cross cannot be my disciple. So this requires then that if you're going to really follow Jesus, you're going to have to do it. Now, take the reality is, and if you get a list of the 12 disciples, you know that one, Judas, is gone. Another one, Matthias comes in, takes their place, but you never hear of him again. But he's now the 12th disciple and apostle. And the other apostles go out. Paul goes out and is put to death. Peter goes out, is put to death. Mark, the gospel writer, is put to death down in Africa. Others are put to death over in India. Others are up into the area that we would call, the areas east of Italy and France and things like that, into Czechoslovakia and other places and stuff like that. And they were all martyred. The only one that they say that wasn't martyred, there were some questions about these things, and that would be John. And the others are somewhat brutalized. They had terrible matters there. In North American Indians did the same thing. They would skin you, that is, pull your skin off. Take your knife and take your skin, so you're down to your under muscle and stuff like that, bleeding all over the place. Titus Brandsma are synced upstairs in our little library up there. There's a picture there of a man who is looks like he's frail and stuff like that. It's a beautiful picture. Why do I say that? Because I gave it to the parish. Yeah. So and what they did with him at Dachau, he's only there 28 days, and he's so frail, is they cut the skin off the bottom of his feet and not allow him to wear shoes or anything. So if he has to go out to work each day, but he's walking on raw material. And this is just one form of the ugliness of these things. There was one of the disciples was himself put into a situation like that of being boiled or other type things. And so I don't mean to get into the gore of this, but it's not like that's the essence of all of it. So anyway, let's continue here. I hope I'm making some sense into a very difficult passage, because what we tend to do is to try to look for meaning in what is said and done. And if that is what is said, is that you must hate your family, then we're in a total posture of lack of understanding. So anyway, so Jesus, and so now, and remember that we're here almost a little bit more than halfway through the gospel, and we find this out. So whoever does not carry his own cross, come after me and be my disciple. I put down there, you can also get this quote from Matthew 10:37. Which of you, wishing to construct a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there is enough for completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding him unable to finish the work, onlookers should laugh at him. So in other words, what you have to have is a plan. Now, if you go back into the 1990s, there was a famous book that was put out by a businessman, and it was the 7 steps to, that you must take to complete your life as a person. One of the chapters was in your marriage, and it talks very much about that. So what we have here, that in order to conclude your life, what is it? What are the 7 steps you must take, or the 7 virtues you must follow? So it says otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlookers should laugh at him. See, there's a great poem. I don't have it with me, but a great poem of a man who says that that the image of humanity is that we are constructors of a house, and what you think of is somebody up on the roof putting into the upper beams and things like that. And it says that is us. And it says, and from that work that seems to be challenging, you get a radiant view. So that's the word that they use in the poem, radiance. In other words, that you are turned from being just flesh and bone into something that is like star-like or sun-like, something that is fantastic, and it brings an aura around the world to you. So let's continue. Verse 30. This one began to build, but did not have the resources to finish. Or what king marching into battle would not first sit down and decide whether with 10,000 troops he can successfully oppose the other king advancing on him with 20,000 troops? But if not, while he's still far away, he'll send a delegation for peace terms. In the same way, and you can see this is underlined, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. So this is where it becomes a challenge to us, does it not? The simile of salt. Salt is good, but if salt loses its taste, with what can its flavor be restored? Well, how does salt lose its taste? Well, first of all, the salt at that time was a different salt than we have now. But if you go down to the Dead Sea, and you know, on these trips that people take to, and the Dead Sea is the Dead Sea. You can literally walk into it. Now, for me, I would enjoy that because I could take a cigar with me, and I could also take the daily news of sports and stuff, and lean back into the water and enjoy the sunlight above and all that stuff. Frying myself, and then come on out and brush the salt off. And well, all you have to do is walk along the beach because the beach has got all this mud in it too. So the salt comes up because the salt Dead Sea is 35% salt. So you can actually sit down and and then when you come back out of it and stuff, you're walking around and it's just on earth mixed into it. So if salt loses its flavor, it means if it gets its dirt in there too, and then what you've done is you've ruined the table salt. So anyway, so in the same way, everyone who does not renounce all its possessions cannot be my disciple. So yeah, if salt loses its taste, what can its flavor be restored? If it is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile, it is thrown out. Whoa, I didn't realize manure. And I even underlined it. Well, my class, if you want to call it that, we spent our novitiate in Pennsylvania. And it was on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, not on the Turnpike, but above the Turnpike. We had a farm there. So the first thing that happened when we got there was, you find out what rooms you're going to have and, what the schedule is for each day and stuff like that. And we see that there's moments for, the morning prayer and then for mass and then, for breakfast. And then you have to work and then you have lunch, snack, and then you get more work. Then you have an hour free time. Then you have about 4 PM, you go in for its office and you have office from 4 to 6 because meditation takes place in there. Then you have recreation at nighttime. So you get your whole plan there, exactly what you're going to do. So anyway, that worked out pretty good. So when I see the word about manure pile, it reminds me of my first day at our novitiate. Yes, you say, well, you better explain that. Yes, well, I'm anxious to do so because the assignment they gave us was to clean out the pig pen because of the fact that it had stacked up its residue. That's a good word, isn't it? That residue was in there for like a year and a half or something like that. And so you had to take a pickaxe and shovels and other stuff like that to get down to the bottom of the floor. So I thought, that well, you see, it was biblical. So, one of the jobs I had, you had to kind of cover up with everything, put a hat on, then you're lowered into the silo because what they're doing in August and stuff like that is they're taking in the hay and the crops and all that kind of stuff, and they're putting it up there on top because that's going to be food for the animals over the winter and stuff. And so they have a great big thing up there, it comes up like this, all the stuff, and then it falls down into the thing. But you can't just leave it there because if it gets stuff in between, air pockets and stuff like that, it might turn to heat and then might turn to fire. So we had to cover ourselves up completely and just walk around in it. So now so they didn't say to us, read Luke's gospel where you must follow what I tell you to do. Because I could have been back on the beach in Chicago, having a beer, having a soda and enjoying life and stuff like that. No, here we were walking around in a silo, stamp down. Well, anyway, you say you're way off track. Well, yeah, I thought about that when I was doing it. so anyway, he says it's salt is good, but if it loses its taste. You remember in Matthew's great Sermon on the Mount, verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the, so you are the salt of the earth, and you are the ones that make the life tasty. So that's the image that he uses there. The salt loses its taste, what can be restored? He says, if it neither for the soil nor for the manure pile is thrown on, whoever has ears to hear ought to hear. Okay, let us continue now, and that will finish. All right, chapter 14. Am I correct? And it is 10:29. So we've covered half of our material. That means we get another half. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts on this? Yes.
Roughly when did the Apostle John pass away? You said he wrote his Gospel of about the year 90.
Yes.
Was he dead?
No, here's what, we do not have, the statements that we would like to have, like an obituary page. It said, well, John passed from this life on April 3rd or something like that. We don't have that. What we do have is by the scholars say that his gospel is so unique compared to the synoptics. That's why it's called synoptic, is he's not like that. And as I mentioned already, he has these dimensions to it that are these long discourses are beautiful from 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is a discourse. And they get all these beautiful things about the Holy Spirit, and I'm going to a place for you. And I'm going to come back and take you to bring you to that place. That's in John chapter 14, 1-6. What you do is get one on the bread of life. If you go to chapter 6 in his gospel, you have two things. One is a description of what it was for Moses to get bread and birds at nighttime. So they had enough to live on for this. So he has that over here. Then what he does over here, because he's got 70 verses, is he actually takes something, this is my judgment, from the Last Supper, and he brings it back here. So you have a story about, God feeding his people. And then over here, Jesus starts talking about himself. In verse 50, he says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will not have life in you. That's quite different than saying, that you're out in the desert getting free food. So this is very obviously a Last Supper discourse, but he places it all the way back here to chapter 6. That's why when you get into the Gospel of John, you have starts at chapter 13 and goes up to chapter 17 for the discourse and the washing of the feet and stuff like that, but not the Eucharist. The Eucharist is not described at the Last Supper as it is in the Synoptics. This is my body, this is my blood. And so the way that people look at this is they say his school operated for some 40 years or so. In other words, these things weren't made up overnight. In other words, there was a school of people that followed what John was doing. And so that they think might have been up to the northeast, like in Damascus or something like that. Could have been a place, just like Matthew was probably in Syria, in the eastern part. And then, Mark is writing for the Romans. So they think they have some purposes to this, but we don't have exact information. So we don't have anything for John except for what people kind of hypothesize, no pun intended, which is that he then was alive to take care of Mary, which all this is debatable, and that would be up in Ephesus, and they still have a chapel up there to that effect. And then he was on the island of Patmos, because he has letters. Besides, you have here's how I don't think anybody would agree of maturity of scholarship would do this, that John, the same John, is the apostle who writes the gospel, who writes the letters, who writes the book of Revelation. They would think these are different items from different people and things. So I'm just, that would be a session in itself just to cover that kind of idea. Where did he come from and where did it go? So we don't have, and we don't have the other martyrs either, except for, the books of the early church, when they, write these, some of the gospel writings that they have are rejected, but they do talk about some of these items, about like when we find out how did Peter die, or how did Paul die or stuff like that. Well, Paul, we would know, but the Acts of the Apostles just stop, so the death is going to be later on, and so anyway, that we're not in a stable sense here of everything that is going to fit into place, whereas with the others, we kind of have a good idea. So it could be that now there is my reading of John is that there is a beloved disciple. And we've talked about this before. The beloved disciple is the one who is next to Jesus. The best information we have there is, he puts his ear to Jesus' heart at the Last Supper. And then at the crucifixion, you have, this is your son, this is your mother, and so we have those kind of things. But people have always wanted to say this is the gospel, this is the Apostle John. And when did he die? We don't know. If he died when he was at that Patmos, which was off the coast of Turkey, and that he was in a cave there. There was a play put on by Lutherans out in California one time, a couple of hour play, and they had the major scene was the mouth of a cave and a fireplace there, and John, to begin the play, gets word that there's because he's got a soldier there with him, and somebody comes up the hill and brings him out of the cave and said, Luke has been murdered. Luke has died. That's the play, not but that's the way they put it. So anyway, it breaks his heart. So he falls down in the play, and then he says to the guard, "Go over to the people on the in the soil of Turkey, and bring me ink and bring me paper and stuff like that." And he starts and writes the gospel. So that's what their play would be. So that's all conjecture. I don't know if this helps us or not. But...
I mean, that book on the shroud, he was the one that collected the shroud.
Oh, really?
That's the author, his depiction of the shroud.
Yeah.
He went into the tomb.
Yes.
He believed.
Yes. That's right. Yeah.
It was John.
Yeah.
Why? Well, he collected the shroud. Is what and he spent a long time researching all the Gospels, but especially John.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because you got it by name right there. That. But again, that's the beloved disciple. So.
Yeah. That's all.
Yeah. So I hope we haven't lost our faith by trying to figure these things out. Well, let's continue now by going to chapter 15. And this is a famous chapter because it builds on 3 parables, one after another. Now, I again just have to give my impression of things. Other people have other impressions. Does this mean that Jesus gives these 3 parables, one after another, and that finishes up in the morning, and so you can go to lunch? No, not quite. I think, let's take the Sermon on the Mount. You say, well, that was terrific, the Sermon on the Mount. Fabulous. Did Jesus give it and then that was it? Or are these things that Jesus has said over a long period of time? He's there in his ministry there. And have they then the writer of Matthew and Luke? Luke has a form of the famous sermon, but it's about maybe 60% of what Matthew has. So Matthew has more. So there's 2 of these sermons, and we think that Luke would have been the first one, and then you get a material added to the other one. So when the author is writing what Jesus said for the famous Sermon on the Mount, would be that this is what Jesus has said at various places and various times. And then the writer would put those, coalesce them into a sequence to make some sense. In other words, we don't follow Jesus on a day-by-day basis and say, well, on Tuesday of so-and-so month, he gave this part, and on Wednesday, he gave this part and stuff. But it could very well be that what Jesus is not going around in his ministry and just giving one sermon or one version of the sermon, stuff like that. So we have to give some recognition to the genius of these writers. The Lutherans back in the early 1900s figured there was no genius because there was nothing that was handed, nothing that was written down that was taken by one of the apostles. that was all stuff that just came from an angel. A famous painting by Caravaggio in the Church of St. Louis IX was that Matthew was writing like this, and he's got his head turned like this, and he's got a sour face because there's some angel up there, and the angel's going like this. This is what you write, And it says in one of the books by Kazantzakis, he said, and he started late at night with a bucket of pens and things like that. And as the sun rose, he gave his gospel over. Yeah, well, that's what they think. So what we get here now are going to be three parables, one after another. The first one deals with an animal. The next one deals with a piece of money. And the next one, the most famous one, is a son. And it's called the prodigal son, which is a misnomer because prodigal means you're generous. So who is generous in the prodigal son parable? It's not the sinner who goes off and wastes his dad's money. And it's not the older brother. The older brother is just as peeved about this as it can be. And so, and he's loaded with sin then, because he's not going to give any kind of support or friendship or whatever to his disciple, brother. Anyway, the father is the one who is prodigal. And in fact, he runs out to meet his son, whereas the older brother doesn't even walk in to go to the party. So let's get into this. See, so this fits my thought that this is perhaps organized, that Jesus would not just give these three, although they make sense by giving a long, sermon like this. But it also makes sense to say that these are parables that Jesus talked about, and this is a good way to give the order with them. So the parable of the lost sheep. So this is the first. You can see it's a little bit blacked out there. And then we get to another area down there, and then we get okay, so let's get this. The tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to him. Who are the tax collectors? People say, well, they're the sinners. Why is that? Well, because they cheat. And they were all drawing near to listen to him. So I put down on there, God is frequently called the shepherd. Israel, the shepherd, the individual. In Psalm 23, I am the good shepherd. Remember that Psalm? In verdant pastures, he gives me repose. That's actually talking about King David, who had to hustle out of town because his son Absalom was going to kill him. And Absalom, sadly, had long hair because when he was riding his mule and stuff like that, his hair got caught in the low branch of a tree. Well, so somebody came along then and speared him. So, and that was Absalom, was the son of King David. But so King David had to get out of town in nighttime. He had to go all the way across to the Mount of Olives and then all the way down to the river. And so anyway, so this is the shepherd Israel. So let's see. It says the tax collector sinners were drawing near to listen to him, but the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Oh boy. So to them he addressed this parable, first of three. What person among you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, would not leave the 99 in the desert and go after the lost one until he finds it? And you're saying to yourself, how does a shepherd work at nighttime? The shepherd has a corral, usually with a low fence. He might lay across the entrance to the crew of people. There are shepherds in there, or I should say of sheep in there. He has to go around to each one of the sheep and pull the stuff out of their nose, because they got, during the daytime, they won't be able to sleep comfortably if they don't sneeze a lot. So he's got to do that. So it's messy work. And you can imagine, all the stuff that they got to be fed and all that. And so anyway, this is what the shepherds are. So when that shepherd is there and he's done all this work on the 99 and there's one that's out there, he's not going to say, I'm going to go try to track that one down and bring him back, because if I do that, these wolves are sitting up there sharpening their knives or their teeth or whatever, because they got their mind that we're going to have a nice sheep dinner. And so it doesn't seem to make sense, does it? I was told that sheep that are lost don't run around and say, where did I go? Where did I go? Especially the young ones. They just lie down. They fold their legs underneath them and they sit in the grass. You find that with a recently born deer. Like if you were deer hunting, I'm not going to tell you that I was deer hunting, but I was following the deer. Anyway, so there's a one that was just given birth probably a week before that, and you couldn't see it because it was in the forest and stuff like that. And you came along and it got brush all around it and things like that. So anyway, that could possibly be here. So when he does find it, he sets it on his shoulders with great joy. See, so I put down there that he anticipates the fact that there's going to be a second parable, and that's going to be joy-filled, and a third one, and that's going to be joy-filled. So this is kind of like the opening the door to three great moments of joy. And says when he does find it, he sets it on his shoulders with great joy. Don't you see when you see pictures of sheep? You don't see them. How about pictures of Jesus? Don't you see that? He's got a sheep over his, and it comes right from this type of thinking here. So he says, he says, I found my lost sheep. I tell you, just the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who have no need of repentance. Now, this is important for us to lock away into our little cabinet of knowledge, because we're going to come to a place where we need to have forgiveness and in heaven. And we said one sinner who repents. That means if you really are a sinner and then God would be loved to have you come down and to save that person. So let's continue. And upon arrival home, he calls to his friends and says, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. So that's it. I tell you in the same way. So now we're going to get parable number 2. In the same way, there will be one more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who have no repentance. And here we get the parable of the lost coin. What woman having 10 coins? Now these might be the daily coin that they get for their work. And losing one would not light a lamp and sweep the house, searching carefully until she finds it. I have been in this situation, not because I had a coin, but because I had something else that I couldn't find. And I went over and over and over and over, only to find out that it was underneath the pillow or underneath the bed or in the closet, or maybe I didn't even have it. So, okay, enough of my sinfulness. So anyway, he said, rejoice with me because I found the coin that I lost. She finds it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, says to them, rejoice with me because I found my coin that I lost. I don't know, what conjecture do we have? Well, maybe she's like the woman, in the temple area that gets 2 coins as charity. It's their social security for widows. And that's what she got. So this one anyway says, I found the coin that I lost. In the same way, I tell you, there will be rejoicing among the angels God over one sinner who repents. See, isn't that a repetition? Aren't we building up to something? And so this is now the parable of the lost son, number 3. And this is Jesus' concern for the lost, God's love for the repentant sinner. So here we have a person who is a repentant sinner who had been lost. And the younger son said to the father, Father, give me the share of your estate that you come to me. So the father divided the property between them. Now, the law here, if you look at Leviticus and stuff like that, I put down, no, you don't be giving them your stuff away, is that the father should give about 2/3 at least of his farm or house or money or whatever to the oldest, because if you give it out to 3 people and each one of them then gives it out to 3 people from their family when they have families, and then they give out stuff, and then all of a sudden your farm is gone. So what you do is you'll have one guy who gets it, and the others can perhaps work on it, but that's it. But it really goes to the oldest one. See, I was with my nephew last night, my oldest brother's son. He was doing some work. So anyway, made me think. I have an older brother, and then another brother, and then me. Oh my. No wonder when they had the ad in the Christian magazine, be a priest. There's a place to flop, 3 meals a day, and no heavy lifting. So I kind of foxed them out, didn't I? Because my 2 brothers are very well off. So the man had 2 sons. The younger son said, Father, give me the share of your estate. So we know now what that happens here is that the bulk of it goes to so if he's going to lose some of the money that the father gave him, this second son, then that's terrible business. So the father divided the property between them. He doesn't divide it by putting a knife down the middle and giving it half and half. That doesn't work that way. He said the rights are to the firstborn. And that's in Leviticus. After a few days, this younger son collected all his belongings, set off to a distant country. You gotta get this, how beautifully this is written there, because it's a distant place. It's not like he went to the next farm over or something like that. He goes to a different country. Let's say he's in Israel and he goes over to Greece or to Rome or to France or something like that. It says where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. Now, dissipation to the older brother means that where would you want to spend your money? And he thinks it's prostitution. But that's not what it says. Dissipation means that he might be finding a place to lodge, a place to live in a hotel, a place to get food, clothing. And so when he got a distant country means a lot. And squandered his inheritance. Verse 14, when he has freely spent everything, see, he has no business knowledge. He doesn't have anything, investment. A severe famine struck that country and he found himself in dire need. He hadn't planned on that. He had planned on living in kind of a nice apartment paid for by the dad. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens who sent him to a farm to tend the swine. Is this not a clever parable or not? The one animal that you can't be dealing with is the pig because of its feet. Leviticus has that, on there that you cannot, that's why there's no pork and stuff like that in the stories. How about the story about Jesus when he cures the demoniac down in the Gentile territory, Decapolis? And what does he do? He takes the animals there, the pigs that they got, and throws them into the lake. Why is that? Because the pigs going into the lake is the place of evil. When Jesus walks along, on a late night kind of a walk along the side, if they say lake, it's okay. But if they say sea, then it's the realm of the evil one, the devil. And so that's what happens here is he takes the devil out of this poor man, throws it into the pigs, and they go into the water, and that's the end of them. So let's continue. You cannot associate with pig meat. So he longed to eat his fill of pods in which the swine fed. What? Trying to think of the name of the tree that this is. It begins with a CAT something or other, and it's a long bean-like thing. It's like a banana, but it's flat. I'm trying to think of what the name of it. What is it?
Elephant tree?
Yes, that's it. Yes. Have you ever seen one like that?
Yes.
Yeah, I have too. I just don't know its name. I mean, I went up to talk to it, and I didn't even get a bark. Oh, okay, good. Well, bring her along. So anyway, says anyway, after he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. This is just great writing. Coming to this census, he thought, how many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat, but here I am dying from hunger. So his father probably has a very successful farm. Says, I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Now he's got it down there, see, that he not only did he hurt his father, but he hurt God because he has violated the laws of Leviticus. So he meets with cognizant, mature, and maturity overtakes him. In other words, something happens to him. All of a sudden, he's the kid no more. He is now a mature person. And so what he has done is he's grown up. And in doing so, he can go back to the father and say, I made a mistake. I just blew the whole thing. Well, I'll work for you as a slave and try to get back. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers. So I get up and went to his father. Well, it's still a long way off. Now, this is highly unusual for some guy, dressed up in ownership of all that, I mean, this is a well-to-do man, and he runs down a hill to catch this man. His father caught sight of him and filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Now, this is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing to somebody who has committed all these sins, is you should be going after them. And so he ran up to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Said, Father, I have sinned. See, this is, he's going to say this over and over and over again because he's, this is his story, and he's going to tell it over and over and over. He doesn't have anything else to say except this. I've sinned against heaven and against you. I don't deserve to be your son. Period. So that's the first time he says that. Okay, now let's continue. Verse 22, the next page. But his father ordered his servants, quickly bring the finest robe. Now I put down there, this is a festal garment. It's a sign of authority to put a ring on him. So in other words, he's treated not just as a family. You can stay with us now. No, he's given the propriety of beautiful things. This garment that they put on him must have been really fashionable, and a sign of authority, for example, that he's got a ring. And take the fatted calf and slaughter it, and then celebrate with a feast. Because his son of mine, the son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and been found. Then the celebration began. You can see what he's talking about by saying he was dead. He was dead to, even though he's walking around and all that kind of stuff, but he's dead to what real life is. That's what has died in him, his soul. So his body might be okay, but his soul is gone. Why? Because he committed these sins, but he now has maturity. And so he goes to his father and says, I grew up. And then, now the older son had been out in the field, and on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. This is trouble for him. He called on one of the servants, asked what this might mean. The servant said, your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound. Now, if you've ever been to Austria, in Europe or in southern Germany, stuff like that, you get the fatted calf because that's what they have there. That's where you get nice, beautiful meat slices and stuff like that. Excuse me for. I put down there that rivalry between brothers is common in biblical themes. Not in my family; they're wonderful people. He said to his father in reply, look, all these years I served you, and not once did I disobey you. You never gave me, See, in other words, this is the person who has fulfilled all the laws of the 613 laws. He's never gone against them. So therefore, he should be kind of touted with all kind of salutation. And just the opposite takes place. He's not included. But when he comes in, if it was true that he was a man of virtue, he would have run in himself to hug his brother. We thought you were dead, but now you're found to listen, we've got a place for you here. He says, I'll take care of you. I'll show you what we've been doing. I'm going to give you a place, that we can live together. All this, and instead, what does he do? He folds his arms and gives him a sneer. He said to the father, look, I've served you. I did everything, and you didn't even give me a goat. So when your son returns who swallowed up your property with prostitutes, now that's an invention by the older brother. For him, you slaughtered the fattened calf. He has returned, but the inheritance doesn't come back with him. So in other words, he's done a lasting thing. It's not just that he comes back and says to the father, I'm mature enough to know that I did wrong, because the father had given him, let's say, 30% of his wealth. And so he said to my son, you're here with me always. Everything I have is yours, which is true. If the father dies, that son would get everything. But now we must celebrate and rejoice because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. Is this not one of the great parables of Jesus in Luke? He has these, the prodigal son, about the man who was beaten up on the road and stuff like that. These are beautiful elements. Well, we're finished a little bit early. What I would like to do, let me see. Next week is going to take us into Lent. This will coincide, will it not, with our material? So there we have chapter 16. And 17. One of the things that we might want to do, we haven't completed it, but as we might want to see if we can do some movie things. The problem with the movie things is we can't do it to broadcast it because it's against the law, but we can do it down here to see. So if we once, because don't you think we're moving right along here? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So anyway, be sure. I'm not forcing these things on you here, but if you just grab one of these things, you can throw it out. Then don't throw it out here. And you can take as many as you want. I mean,
we're going to stop.
What you're going to find is that their articles are like 2 or 3 pages usually.